Okay, so if you would, if you're not already on the rubric, I want to start our discussion taking a look at that. So it should be all the way at the top of that document. Okay, I want to point out there are 4 rows. When I go to grade, they're 10 points each. They're 10 points each. So reading reflection journal, 40 points total in written comp. Okay, the big thing I want to point out is the balance of this. So that first row is kind of basic information, your summary, and that's also where your grammar grade falls. So is it clear? Is it written in complete sentences, capitalization, all that good stuff. Okay, that is only 10 points of the 40. Okay, not to say it's not important, but it's not really what this assignment is about. Okay, this is really about boxes 2, 3, and 4. Okay, that's your analysis. It's your answer to the prompt. It's how deep you go into that answer, and it's how well you explain and support it. Okay, so this is definitely way more about content. I put more weight in that because that's what matters more to me. Okay, why don't I put so much weight into your summary of what the book is about? I don't really know. So it's really just give me enough of a summary that I have a vague idea of what's going on. You are not going to tell me every single thing that's happened throughout the entirety of the book. Okay, why else do I place less weight on simply telling me what it's about or summarizing it? Why don't I care about that as much?
Because with the other thing, you kind of have to think a little bit like deeper.
Yeah, imagine that. It's about your thinking. Okay? You can Google the summary. Don't, because I'll give you a 0 on the whole thing. But you can fake summarizing what the book is about a lot easier than you can fake thinking about the answers to those questions. Okay, so it really is partially for me to go, are you actually reading your book? Okay, but it also gives me insight into what you're latching onto, what you care about in the book. Okay, so those last 3 rows are where the vast majority of your grade comes from. You have to actually think about it, and then you have to explain your thinking, okay, clearly. So, knowing that, let's start with our lowest one, the 20%, the F of the bunch. Okay, which letter is it? Which one is it?
D.
D. Okay, usually this one is a resounding, we're all in agreement. Did anybody have one other than D? Okay, so D for this one is correct. So why? Why is this the weakest response?
It was like really, really short, and it didn't really like have a lot of information about the book, and like when it went to go and answer the question, it didn't restate it, and it didn't give like a sample from the text to help support that answer.
Okay.
I think the answer was only like 4 questions, and it was like 4 words, and it just said, and it's because she is stressed. She's
Okay.
with this.
So no thesis, no evidence. It's lacking some of that basic information as well as some of the larger information. Okay, it is short. What else?
So it never gave the author, and it just says that it's just the second book in the trilogy, in the slated trilogy.
Okay, so if we talk lacking info, I don't know who wrote it, and I don't know the title of this particular book. Now, could I Google the trilogy and find out? Yes. Am I going to take the time to do that? No. Okay, I do like that they told me that it's part of a series. And I do like that they told me that this is book 2. Okay, even if they had given me the title, I still would have liked to know series book 2. That tells me a little bit. It tells me they liked book 1 enough to keep reading. It also tells me that they perhaps have a direction they're going when this book is over. They might move on to book 3. And if they don't, that's a conversation point for me because I want to know why. Why did you stop? Why not continue on to the next book? Mrs. Mason. Yes. Okay, got it. Thank you. Bye. Your dad is at door 1 waiting for you. So
Is
outside
that
main high school office, not outdoor.
okay.
Okay, what else? What else does this one not do or not do well?
It was incredibly hard to read some parts of it because it felt like words were missing from the sentences.
Okay. So pretty choppy sentences. It feels like ideas are missing or thoughts are incomplete. So just even in the basic information that we get, that information is difficult to understand. Okay. What was the prompt for this one? What were they trying to answer? What are you struggling with or disliking about your book so far? So that's the prompt they chose. Did they answer it? Did they tell us what they're struggling with or what they don't like about it so far? Some of us see some no's. Okay? They didn't answer the prompt at all. So if we talk about, I told you on the thesis, small amount of summary, lots of analysis. That's what I'm looking for. Okay? This one is all summary, 100%. This could have been copied from Google, although it's poorly written, so it's probably not. Or they copied it and then they tried to alter it and didn't do a very good job because now it doesn't make any sense. Okay, so all summary, no analysis. So they're going to get zeros for 3 rows on the rubric. So the highest score they can get for not answering a question is a 10 out of 40. And they didn't even do that well, so they got an 8 out of 40. Okay, you have, if you do nothing else, you have to answer the question. Okay? What about, and I will tell you this C, if I could go back and regrade it, is honestly probably more of a C minus. A C was very generous. It would probably fall into D territory. Okay? So which one is the next in line? Still not great. Better than D, but still not great. What do we think? What'd you have? You put them in order. What do you think? E? Okay. We've got 1 vote for E. Anybody else have something different? Really, you all agreed. You sure? Okay, it's not E. Does anybody want to take another guess? C, as in cat? Okay. What do we think? A. Oh, we're going to throw all of them out there? B. Is that what you guys had, honestly? Okay. We've thrown all of them out. Does anybody want to agree or disagree with any of these? You agree or disagree? Okay, so we've got 2 votes for B. Are you just saying there's 2 votes, so I'm going to lean because that seems, okay. Okay. So this one is B. If you look at that, initially the biggest difference is we actually have some analysis now. Now, it's very imbalanced. It's still 90% summary, maybe 10% analysis. Okay, but what has this one done, since they're the same, What has this one done that the previous one did not? What did they do that bumped them from that D to that? How did they sneak by with a C?
They had all the basic info.
Okay? So they took that 8 out of 10 up to a 10. So the basic info is there. Their progress, the title, the author. What else did they do that gave them the biggest bump? Yeah.
They actually used stuff from the book and the page numbers.
Okay, so they actually gave us evidence, which means what? Evidence to support what? Huh? An answer. They actually answered the question. So already they have a shot at those last 3 rows on the rubric that this person did not. Okay, so we actually have an answer to the prompt. Now, do they provide a whole lot of depth and insight into why they are struggling? Not really. They mention the struggle, so it's named, I'm struggling with this. Okay? They mention very briefly why, but there's not very much explanation. There's not a whole lot of evidence. Okay? This needed way, way, way more discussion of why this struggle is happening. Especially, my first question is, at 75% of the way through the book, this is still a struggle? Like, I'm initially questioning, is it the book or is it you? And if there had been more explanation, it would have been clear it was actually the book. It's a very confusing story because the girl is living double lives. And she doesn't quite understand why. Okay, so it's answered. That's what really pushed them over. But they're at about a 65% for the depth of their explanation. Okay, so you can't just answer it in one sentence and then wash your hands of it and be done. You have to explain. Why? Why do you think that? Why do you feel that? Okay? Okay, we'll finish the other 3 tomorrow. Okay, so if you remember yesterday, we got our bottom 2, so our 20% F was letter D, which I think we were all in agreement on. The next one up was a C+, but if you remember I said if I were to go back and kind of look a little bit closer now that it's been 3 years, it's probably more of a C-. Okay, biggest difference between the two. This one actually answered our prompt. It at least answered the question. It just did not answer it well. They didn't go in depth. They didn't explain why that was a struggle, and they didn't have any evidence. So we've got B and D. All right, so who wants to take a stab? Which one is our B-? What's the kind of middle of the road? They didn't do great, but they didn't do really, really bad. Okay. Did you have your hand up? What do you think? A. Okay, so A is an apple. We've got a couple votes for A. Did anybody have any others? Man, you guys are way more in agreement than 8th period was. 8th period was already fighting here.
There was something to put A for that one.
Oh, 8th period had every letter up here.
Oh, wow.
They definitely could not agree. Okay, so we're going A. You would be correct. So why? Why is this guy kind of middle of the road? What did they do? What did they not do? What did they do that B did not?
they don't answer the prompt correctly per se. They ask about something interesting they've learned, but they not only say something they aren't interested in, what they say they find interesting isn't a constant fact.
Okay.
It's very weirdly, I don't know how to explain it.
To share something interesting, though, in and of itself is opinion. It's what you believe to be interesting. So where's the disconnect?
They use their like put their ideas in a clear manner, but the thing is that their book is non-fiction, and it just seems like the facts they're giving are kind of weird in my opinion.
Well, it is opinion. What I think is interesting is not going to be what you believe is interesting. So it's an opinionated question. So when they say, I found the most interesting proven fact was, I know they're going to give me a fact that they found interesting. It's a nonfiction book, so it makes sense that they're going to give me a fact that interested them.
The problem is they didn't provide any evidence that it proves that.
They give evidence in the sense that you guys are used to. So they give me a fact from the book, right? But in this case, telling me that the fact is that most Japanese people take horrible situations, for example, being crammed on a train, and don't complain, that's not evidence, right? It is the fact they find interesting. So that first part's their thesis. Here's the piece I find interesting. The problem is they stop there. They don't support what? What should be their next breath? What's missing? Why? Great, you gave me a fact. You could have opened the book, pointed your finger, and said, that's what I find more interesting. Okay, but they don't explain, why is that the interesting fact? Why does that interest you? Is it because it seems so very different from the culture that we have here in the United States, where if we were jam-packed on a train, most likely the vast majority of the people would be complaining. But that's not what happens there. So there's no discussion, there's no explanation of why this fact. In this case, this is kind of an odd one, that explanation is the support, that is the evidence. So because it's a nonfiction book, simply telling me a fact from the book isn't enough. You have to go on and support, why is that what you find interesting? So at first glance, it may seem like it has evidence, but it really doesn't. Okay, so they got docked in that answer depth and the evidence support area. Their thesis didn't get a full 10 points either, because in their thesis it should say why it's interesting, and then they go on to support. Okay, our balance is a little bit better between summary and analysis. We got a little bit more analysis on this one, just a little. We're probably at about 60-40, maybe 70-30, so 70% summary, 30% analysis. Okay, what else?
I just feel like the fact that they put was like an overgeneralization about Japanese people. So like saying that and then giving no evidence or like support that, it just makes it sound weird by itself.
Okay, so would it have been stronger, do you feel like, if they had actually, since they summarized something that they feel they learned from the book, is a quote perhaps a little bit more necessary here? Where in the book did it say that? Because it's not their opinion. This is from the book they were reading. I remember looking at this book. It was a book all about Japan and Japanese culture.
The problem I have with this one is they say, I found out this book was written around the 70s or 80s, so not all the facts are still correct, how do facts change? Like in that case, if it's a cultural like analysis,
Culture changes.
that's fair.
The culture we had in the 70s and 80s in the United States is
that's-
nothing
that's
like
true.
the culture we have now. So I kind of like that the writer acknowledged, like, the fact that I'm going to give you may no longer be correct, but according to the book I'm reading, here's what it said, here's what it used to be. So I kind of liked that acknowledgement of it's not a modern look at the culture, but learning a little bit of history, a little bit about it. Okay, so this one lands a B minus, and again, it's just not enough explanation. Go deeper. Tell me more. Like I said, you could have pointed at random and answered this prompt the way that it's answered. Okay? So what comes next? Low A. These are the two we always argue over. What's the A minus?
We have prompt D.
D?
E.
E. Okay? E is an elephant.
C for us.
Okay, so obviously we're between these two. So how many of you said E? How many of you placed E here? Just one group? That's it. Okay? So I'm assuming everybody else was C, unless you got out of order at some point. Okay, now bear in mind they're very close. You're talking the difference between an A and an A minus. So we start to get picky here. So let's start with, what does this one do? What does this one do that this one does not, or the previous ones do not? How is this one different?
Paragraph one.
What?
Paragraph one.
Okay, so we've got multiple paragraphs now. Which honestly, this one needed. It would have helped this one to have some paragraphs. So just the fact that they're kind of chunking their ideas into these paragraphs is super helpful. Coming from someone who has to read 60 to 70 of these. Okay, what else? Just by looking at it, what's different?
There's a lot more there.
Okay? It's longer. Now, I will always tell you, just because it's longer, just because they wrote more, does not make it better. Okay? These two are probably about the same length, but clearly one does it better than the other. Okay, so just the sheer fact of it being longer doesn't automatically make it better, but they did write more. Why? Why did they write more?
Why they wrote more?
Yeah, why initially, what is the reason that they had to write more than the other ones? Yeah, so they chose to answer multiple questions. You do not have to do that. They could have answered one question really, really well and probably got a higher grade. Okay, so where do they struggle with answering the multiple prompts in this one? They made that choice and they didn't do it well. Why not?
They answered their first and third one pretty well, but then the middle one is very short and it's not well explained.
Okay? So the first and third prompts are answered well. And the second one's a little short, a little vague. I docked them too because the 3 paragraphs are unrelated. They don't do anything to tie them together. If the 3 answers were somehow connected, so they talk about a bad decision that a character made, and because of that bad decision, they really dislike that character. And in the future, they hope that maybe that character can do something to redeem themselves. That's 3 prompts. That's what's a decision a character made that you disagree with, who's a character you don't like, and what do you hope happens as you read on. That's 3 prompts, but they're all connected. It's going to seem like one big idea that flows from one paragraph to another. This one feels like 3 separate paragraphs that were written at 3 separate times. And there's no thread tying them together. Right? And that second one is very vague. It's like they started an idea and then jumped to another idea and never really finished that second one. Okay, I will say, because I only require that you answer one question, I was fairly generous and I based the majority of the grade on this one on the 3rd paragraph, on their analysis to that answer, which was fairly well written. And I advised them in the future, if you're going to answer multiple prompts, to make sure that they're connected rather than random. Other thoughts on this one? So based on that 3rd paragraph, they got a 10 out of 10 on the last 2 lines of the rubric, the answer depth and the evidence. I docked them on their thesis because it wasn't clear throughout. Yeah?
Some of the grammar and wording is really weird.
Okay, yeah, they definitely, you can tell they did not go back and reread what they had written. Otherwise, some of it they probably would have caught. There were some grammar issues. This one definitely had some sentence structure. You had to read sentences a couple times and kind of go, what is this trying to say? Okay, again, it's only 1 line on the rubric. And I think out of the 3 paragraphs, their 3rd was also the strongest grammatically. So I also based it on that.
I think overall, like, this kind of includes everything that's been said. There's just no flow reading this. Flow in thought, grammar, anything. It's junky.
Okay? I read anything I ever write. From an email to like a note that I leave my husband, I read it out loud. Because that's what my mom taught me to do. Whenever I asked my mom to read something I had written, she read it out loud. Because a lot of times, at least for me, that's where I hear that. You can hear where it just doesn't flow well, or it doesn't read well. Okay, what else?
Like with the grammar, I just thought it was really weird how they kept putting ellipses on stuff. I was like, why is there ellipses in the middle of the sentence?
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah, it's kind of like I'm going to use ellipses because I don't really know how to use a comma here, and I don't really know if I should stop my sentence. They were definitely writing as they were thinking. They hadn't thought about beforehand, what am I going to say? It was just idea dump, which is fine, but then you have to go back and reread it. Does what's coming out of my head onto paper, onto the computer, does it make sense? Because oftentimes our thoughts are all over the place, and you've got to organize them a little bit. Okay, so all the writing things I know you all have been taught, you don't have to jump straight into writing your journal. Make an outline. Do a web. Do a brainstorm. Figure out, how am I going to organize my thoughts? What are my talking points? Even just a bulleted list of here's what I'm going to do to answer this question. Okay, those little things, and then rereading it once you've read it or once you've written it would have probably helped this one a lot. Because I remember the conversation with this student. I handed it to him and I said, read it to me. And they read it out loud and they made it maybe through the first paragraph and they were like, this is terrible. I was like, yeah, it is. But now you're hearing it since you've gone back to it. Okay? So that leaves C as getting the highest grade. Why? And if you didn't have C first, you can go back and look at it. Bless you. Okay, why?
Also because there was a good amount of information and they answered everything well.
Okay. Did this one answer? Yeah, it answered 3 prompts. Did the 3 prompts feel different
No.
in this one versus this one? Okay.
Wow, I just walked through. On top of, like, it being answered well, it was answered very concisely. There wasn't, like, repetitive information. It
Okay.
was just what you needed. And if there was anything that may have been repeated, there was a slight variation to it to explain something.
Okay. So there's no unnecessary summary. You're not telling me something that then I don't really need to know in order to understand your answer. And if I do need to know it, they may bring it back from the summary or they may repeat it. But what they're doing is they're connecting it to why is it there? So what? Okay, you guys will hear me use a lot. What is your answer? What's the connection? What's the evidence? But then I'll ask, so what? Who cares? Why are you telling me this? Why does it matter? Why does it answer the prompt? And if you can't answer that so what in relation to this, then it probably doesn't matter. It's probably not necessary. Okay, so they're being concise, and what they are giving me, they're connecting back to their answer. Here's why it matters. Here's